Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. It was an interesting box office this weekend. Dune Part 2 opened in theaters on Friday, March 1st, though there were also previews the night before on February 29th. And Madame Web continues to slog along into flopdom as its box office continues to shrink. But before proceeding, I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please subscribe to this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! Dune Part 2 had a pretty good domestic opening weekend. As I had talked about in a video that I had released on March 1st, Box Office Pro was predicting that the movie's domestic opening weekend box office would likely be somewhere between $71 million to $86 million, and that's exactly where it ended up. Dune Part 2 earned $81.5 million domestically for its opening weekend, which is more than the $78.5 million midpoint from Box Office Pro's most recent predicted range. But as of the time that I am recording this video, internationally the movie hasn't yet opened in one of the largest movie markets around the world, China. It will open there next week, and it doesn't open in Japan and several other countries for another 2 weeks. So the movie's $97 million international opening weekend is incomplete, but gives the movie a $178.5 million global gross opening weekend total. This means that the movie's current domestic share of 45.66% is artificially higher than it should be due to the movie not opening everywhere internationally this weekend. Now, since we don't have a franchise situation in which there are multiple movies from which a franchise average weekly drop can be calculated, along with a standard deviation to create a range, we only have one previous movie that we can use to estimate what this movie's average weekly drop might be. Hence, I will use the previous movie's average weekly drop of 37.86%, and I will use a range that's plus or minus 5% from that, since there's now actual box office data available to provide a single starting point. That creates a range of possible average weekly drops from 32.86% to 42.86%, which when applied to the movie's current domestic box office revenue, yields a range of possible final domestic box office revenue of $190.2 million at the low end, $215.2 million at the mid-range, and $247.8 million at the upper end, which aren't that much different from the previous projections that I made on March 1st. But to more accurately project the possible global gross box office for this movie, I am actually going to adjust the domestic share to account for the possible box office earnings from China and the other countries where the movie hasn't yet opened, instead of using the current artificially high domestic share of 45.66%. So by guessing that another $40 million may be obtained from China next weekend, in addition to the rest of the international box office revenue, that lowers the domestic share to a very narrow range around a value of 40.11%, which is currently much higher than the first movie's domestic share of 25.3%. And when I do that, I get the following more approximated projected final global gross box office range from $475.9 million at the low end, $536.6 million at the mid-range, and $615.6 million at the upper end, which are much lower than the projections from March 1st, but still give the movie a reasonable chance of breaking even, though I do recommend viewing these projections as being less reliable until the actual box office is available from China, Japan, and the other countries where the movie hasn't yet opened. The movie's estimated break-even point range of $475 million to $570 million is calculated by multiplying its $190 million production budget by 2.5 and 3.0 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget. Now, the third weekend at the box office for Madame Web was in no way surprising. Domestically, the movie earned another $3.2 million over the weekend plus $1.9 million during the week to bring its current domestic box office total up to $40.4 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $8.5 million to bring its current international box office total up to $50.6 million. And globally, the movie earned another $13.5 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $91 million. Thus, it still hasn't even reached $100 million globally yet. Using a range of possible average weekly drops of 24.07 to 44.21%, which are one standard deviation above and below the average weekly drop of 34.14% for Sony's and Columbia Pictures' previous 16 Marvel movies, I can project that the final domestic box office for Madame Web will likely be somewhere between $46.9 million at the low end, $50.2 million at the mid-range, and $56.2 million at the upper end. So it now doesn't look like Madame Web will break $60 million at the domestic box office. So it's definitely not going to earn anywhere near as much as the $73.9 million that Morbius earned domestically in 2022, as represented by the orange line in the chart. But it might still earn more than the $51.8 million that 2012's Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance earned domestically, as represented by the green horizontal line in the chart, but we'll have to wait and see because Madame Web is either going to be the lowest or second lowest grossing Marvel movie of all time domestically for Sony and Columbia Pictures. In terms of its global box office, Madame Web now has a domestic share of 44.42%, which is slightly lower than what it was last week, but it's well within the 31.04% to 49.72% range that's one standard deviation above and below the Sony and Columbia Pictures Marvel movie average domestic share of 40.38%. So using the movie's current domestic share, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office values will probably range from $105.5 million at the low end, $113.1 million at the mid-range, and $126.5 million at the upper end, which is a much lower range than last week's projections. And this most definitely means that Madame Web is going to become the lowest grossing Marvel movie for Sony and Columbia Pictures of all time, because that projected range is far below the $149.2 million that Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance earned globally back in 2012, and that doesn't even take inflation into account. So just as Disney's recently released female-led movie The Marvels became the lowest grossing movie of all time for the MCU and its 33 movies, the female-led Madame Web is earning the same fate for Sony and Columbia Pictures and their 17 Marvel movies. And where does this place the chances of Madame Web to break even? There aren't any, given that the movie's $100 million production budget, when multiplied by 2.5 and 3.0, yields an estimated break-even point range of $250 million to $300 million. And Madame Web isn't going to earn anywhere near that. In fact, the movie currently stands to lose somewhere between $123.5 million to $194.5 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that Sony and Columbia Pictures are probably going to lose somewhere on the order of $61.7 million to $97.3 million. And while this may not ultimately become the biggest flop for 2024, it's definitely one of the largest flops to begin the year. So while Madame Web epitomizes the saying, "Go woke, go broke," Warner Bros. Discovery's sci-fi movie Dune Part 2 still has a chance of breaking even. We'll have to wait and see where these two films end up. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.